Johnny McGonigal, we're back on a Thursday for the Blue-White Breakdown. We haven't done many Thursdays. I'm trying to think. It's probably a short list. Usually we're in and out Tuesday or Wednesday, but it was a busy. We had a trip up to State College to talk to James, Andy Kotelnicki, a couple of players. So we kind of pushed it back a little, Johnny. We also were at Pro Day last Friday in State College, which was early, but mercifully it was over by around lunchtime. So I think if they want to start it, Johnny, next year at 6 a.m., I'll just go get a room up there, and I could be on my merry way by like 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd be great with it. How about you?
I was gonna say, would you wake up at like 3
No,
a.m. and leave from Harrisburg at that
no,
point?
no. I would make them put me in a hotel room, and
Well,
then
you know what? I'm sure the hotel rates in March are a little bit different than they are in September, October, and November.
yeah,
So I think the PennLive overlords would
yeah,
would take to that more kindly.
yeah. Johnny, I think let's just start with the availability, the Tuesday availability. Little late was a little late Tuesday night, but very appreciative of James Franklin for opening up practice, talking to us, making his new offensive coordinator available, along with it was Sal Wormley, Kobe King, and Devon Ellis. Very appreciative of that. Let's not sugarcoat it, Johnny. I think everyone is so curious about the offense, given the nightmarish performance last year when it mattered against Ohio State and Michigan. Um, James Franklin has clearly moved on from Mike Yurcich. I don't know that he'll ever, Johnny, even mention him by name again. The
I
fact
don't
that he fired him the day after the Michigan game, but it's just funny to see him kind of reference last year, and he's got no problems mentioning Manny Diaz and all he's done for Penn State. And he talked about the impact of the new coordinators on Tuesday night. But I know you got to absorb quite a bit from Andy, and fascinating hire. It's a fascinating offseason, 12-team playoff. I think Penn State fans expect well. This is the year we're going to be in the playoffs. We got a creative guy to upgrade our offense. Certainly plenty of talent, even though they lost some talent. Plenty of talent coming back. Two very talented quarterbacks, two very talented running backs, a go-to guy at tight end, some depth along the offensive line. So since you spent, I think you had Kotelnicki for about 15 minutes. What stood out to you about him? I know you've written about him. You're going to continue to write about him. But what stood out to you about some of the things he said, and did it kind of carry over from his introductory press conference about what he wanted to do?
Yeah, Bob, real quick to touch on what you referenced kind of at the top there with not mentioning Mike Yurcich. So that stems from a question that James was asked about basically the process of replacing three coordinators in spring camp, how it's going, all that kind of stuff. And James, he left some names out, but he was saying, yeah, look, it's difficult to replace a Brent Pry. It's difficult to replace, a Manny Diaz. He did not say it's difficult to replace a Mike Yurcich. So the guy who is replacing Mike Yurcich, though, is Andy Kotelnicki. And like you mentioned, we were able to speak to him on Tuesday night after James Franklin talked to everyone. They brought Andy out, and then they brought a handful of players out. And I know you got some good stuff from them. And I just stayed at Andy because I'm like,
Sure.
when's the next time we're going to be able to speak to the offensive coordinator? Who knows? And so, yeah, he's just my impressions of him, by the way, just in practice, is that he's a very energetic, intense, kind of no BS kind of guy. I mean, he had the quarterbacks going through ball security drills in both practice windows that we saw, and that's something that maybe we just didn't see last year because it happened at a different time in practice, but it seems new. He's very tuned in, and he's been on campus now since December. When he was hired, he was hanging around the Lash building, even in an unofficial capacity by that point, and has gotten to know Drew Aller a lot over this time, has gotten to know his roster. And I know that I've written two things I've already published off of Andy. One thing is coming this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start, though, with the wide receivers and then go from there.
Sure.
Because that's kind of what stood out to me most from what Andy said. He was asked about the wide receivers, a group that was under scrutiny last year for, struggling at times. Let's say, but Andy was really, he was praising them. He said that, look, I think this group is going to surprise some people. He really talked to their demeanor and said that, he said, I think they're progressing really, really well right now. I'm very pleased with that group position. That's going to surprise some people. And then he said, they're wearing a chip on their shoulder. Everyone's going to point the finger at them, right or wrong. That's what it is. It's a will show you. I believe they have a chip on their shoulder and they'll surprise people. And so, look, the wide receiver room, frankly, was a part of a disappointing offense when it mattered most last year. You look at the, Keandre Lambert-Smith, kind of fading down the stretch, disappearing with 2 catches in his final 4 games. Harrison Wallace with the injury issues never really got going. The development of the second-tier guys never really came into focus. Dante Cephas, who transferred out, we've talked about him and how he was kind of an underwhelming transfer addition after coming in with a lot of hype. And so it's a room that you add Julian Fleming now, and you have this group of guys that endured last season and has to grow from it. I do think what's Andy going to say, that these guys are terrible? Like, he's not going to say that, obviously, but he could have said, you know what, like, I want to challenge these guys, and I'm not seeing it right now, but he's been impressed with them. And I think the one quote that honestly stood out the most, maybe the quote of the offseason so far, Bob, it's early, but he said the wide receivers have been, committed themselves to improving daily. We've challenged them physically and mentally more than they have been, and they've responded well. Not sure if that was a subtle, like, hey, the last guy wasn't, really, pushing these guys or what, or maybe he's just speaking to, what they've done so far. But some interesting stuff on Andy on a wide receiver room that we know is under the microscope right now and going into the 2024 season.
Yeah, I think as the offseason progresses, Johnny, you and I are going to be, it won't just be Andy. It'll be probably James more than Andy, but I'm going to be looking for how many times. All right, he just said forever. It just felt like the whole 2023 offseason going into the whole 2023 regular season, it was the same refrain, still waiting for some guys to emerge, right? And that, to me, like, I think I was stupid enough to look at that. Well, he's trying to encourage everybody. He knows what he's got, and he doesn't want to mentally, like, deflate some guys. But the other side of the coin was he could have been telling the brutal truth that no one had emerged, and it kind of looked that way, I think, last year. I don't think Mike Yurcich necessarily orchestrated the offense enough to maybe get some players on the field and just utilizing maybe their specific strengths. But we'll see what Andy is going to do. But I mentioned at the top, Johnny, that I think this is what the Penn State fans want to know. What have we learned about the offense? What have we learned about the Noah OC? But I also think the other thing the fans, I think they really want to know is what kind of vision does Andy maybe have for a talent like Bo Prabula, who is so unique. And I think they were able to show last time. There's room in an offense for those two guys to be involved, be against every team, even if they're on the field at the same time. When they were on the field at the same time last year, though, Johnny, it was pretty obvious that they didn't. You knew that if Bo was in the game, chances are he was going to get the ball. They didn't really camouflage things. I think this guy. I'm hoping this guy can be a little bit more creative, a little bit more varied, and I think the fans really, really are curious, not only with him but with James, where Bo Prabula stands. Maybe at the end of spring drills. I think you and I both agree that it would really be stunning if Drew wasn't the guy, but stranger things have happened. But I do think there's a world in which Prabula has to have his role expanded, and Andy might be the guy to do that.
Yeah, if there's going to be someone who's the guy, it's going to be Andy Kotelnicki. You look at what he's done in his past, both at Kansas and Buffalo. And he's used not only two quarterback sets, but there's a clip out there. I actually included it in the story that I wrote about Bo that's up online. I think it went up this morning, Thursday morning. It's like a two quarterback reverse boot pass. And if that sounds confusing, just watch it. It's like poetry in motion. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of those are the kind of plays, those are the kind of sets, those are the kind of wrinkles, along with just a normal, like your normal base offense. It's an explosive offense by itself. But those are the kind of wrinkles and different things that Andy Kotelnicki brings to the table. That I think last year, Penn State's offense in more than one area lacked ingenuity, creativity, explosiveness for sure. And I think that's what he brings to the table. And so you look at what Bo Prabula can do for you. And I asked Andy, Bo had this role last year where he was a spark for this offense at times. But do you see that growing? Do you see that developing, into next season? And he didn't specifically talk about Bo, but I thought his answer spoke volumes. And I'll just read it to you because it is a really good quote.
I love it.
He said, one of the objectives that we have this spring as a staff is to really understand what the players' capabilities and limitations are at being able to build around them. Any player that can help us win games on our offense, we will find a way to utilize. If we've got 8 O-linemen that are going to help us win a game, we'll put them out there at the same time. If we got 8 running backs, we'll find a way to put them on the field. We can't do that because it's illegal, but you know what I mean. We'll be as creative and as unique as necessary to utilize our players. And Bob, like that sound like in a vacuum that might just sound like coach speak, but when you compare that and juxtapose that to what he's done in his career so far, like he's just not blowing smoke. Like
Right.
I really think that if he sees that Bo Prabula can help this team and help this offense, and not just in like fun little quirky things or him coming in as the mop up duty kind of deal, like if Andy Kotelnicki thinks that Bo Prabula can help Penn State, beat Ohio State and beat Washington and USC, like in these big games, he's going to use them. And I know that Drew Aller is the guy, and he talked about Drew too. I've got a story coming out on that over the weekend, but some interesting comments just on Drew's mentality, and he's really impressed with how he is so focused on improving every day and dealing with the pressure really well. But so Drew's going to be the guy, but I do think there's a really intriguing spot for Bo Prabula in this offense, and I know you're looking forward to seeing it just as well as I am, and the Penn State fans as well.
Yeah, Johnny. Before I know, at the very start of Andy's press conference, not informal press conference after practice on Tuesday, before I kind of jetted away to talk to some players. I know you were there for the whole thing. I wanted to ask you about one thing I thought he said. It just kind of it was refreshing to hear him say it. I know he is he's on the practice field, and I think in life he's an extrovert. I think he's a people person, and I think he seems like a guy that if he sees something he likes or doesn't like, he's going to let you know, right? And I think that's really important. I don't know if I really ever saw that in 2021, 2022, but that could have just been me. But he talked about how much he enjoyed teaching football and teaching these guys what he wants to do. And at one point, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, this is the time of year, especially where you're kind of the players are going to fail, right? They're going to fail at something they do, but to me, he kind of said that's kind of a good sign because he feels like they're not going to get better unless they make a couple of mistakes along the way. And he's eager to kind of correct them and maybe get them up to speed. I don't remember ever really hearing that, I guess, the last couple of years. Maybe even dating back to Joe Moorhead for whatever reason. But for him to say that, I kind of believe that, right? And I do think that I haven't really heard him, an offensive coordinator, say, look, I'm kind of a teacher first, and if those guys fail, that's actually kind of a good thing at this time of year.
Yeah, definitely. Like he's an open guy. You call it like extrovert. Like I would agree with that. Now, like I mentioned in my little Bo Prabula talk there. Like I asked about Bo specifically, and he did not tell me like, yeah, Bo is going to do X, Y, Z. So
Yeah.
he's still got that coach in him, right? Where he's not going to give it away. He's not going to tell you all his plans and make the story you're writing a hell of a lot easier. But at the same time, he is an open dude, and you can tell that. Again, referencing what he said about Drew Aller and talking about when he was asked about Drew, Drew's first couple weeks in spring camp, how he's doing and everything. Like he went to the mentality side of it. He went to the in the lash building side of it in terms of his approach and everything, right? Like I mentioned, getting better and being so focused on looking in the mirror and knowing what you're doing good and bad and correcting the latter. And one thing that stood out to me too, Bob, I think it might have been in that same answer. Maybe it was a question later, but when Andy was talking about the offense and installing the offense and everything, when he's talking to the offensive players early on when he was first hired, he was asking them, like, what do you think this offense needs to be? Like, what do you want to get out of this offense? And the players rattle off a bunch of different adjectives like explosive, confident, et cetera, et cetera. And, I really think that matters when you're an offensive coordinator and you have that relationship with your players, with your quarterbacks specifically. It's really important. But when you get the feedback and you feel the room and know what they feel like they need to do, I think it helps your job coming in to accomplish it. And I really think he's going to do a good job as the offensive coordinator. I would be surprised if Penn State's offense wasn't in the bigger games too, just better than it was last year. Honestly, more pleasing to watch because, last year was basically let's get it to third and short and pray. I shouldn't say pray because when you have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and, an older offensive line, like, it's pretty good. But at the same time, like they were uninspired in the biggest moments last year. And I think Andy is going to flip that switch.
Yeah. Before we could talk a little, just at the a little bit about the pro day effort, because it was a pretty good pro day for some Penn State players. Andy Kotelnicki, former played offensive line center in college. James was asked about the offensive line. They got to replace 3 starters, the 2 tackles in the center, but it's pretty clear. I think he's mentioned this player's name a couple of times now. JB Nelson, and kind of what he means to this offensive line. And, before the 2022 season, I didn't, James mentioned this name and I knew he was a JUCO and I didn't really know. So, it's not always, you just don't always know with him. He's mentioned some offensive linemen before, Johnny, that it's just kind of been, he didn't want to leave anyone out. But, JB Nelson did start some games at left guard last year. He dealt with an injury. I think he suffered the Northwestern game. They do have other guards they like, but for a guy that I think is like 6'3" or 6'5", 320, with Drew Shelton sidelined and maybe some questions at right tackle since they're replacing both tackles, James came through to me loud and clear that Nelson is a guy I think they wouldn't hesitate to use in multiple positions, maybe other than center, and they feel like he can go in and do the job. So I don't know if I just think of him as a guard anymore, and I do think that if he continues to develop and if he gets more reps and some other guys step forward and maybe some young players don't step forward, he could be a guy that they can move him around if there's an injury. But I mean, he's worked at left tackle. I think he could probably play right tackle, both guards. He might be one of the more valuable offensive linemen on this team, and maybe one of the more valuable players on this team.
Yeah, I agree. And Bob, this is the time to do it, right? Like, and the Drew Shelton injury, even if that wasn't a thing, I think you would still see JB Nelson working at tackle because spring camp is the time to get these reps. Especially like you mentioned, you lose your 2 tackles. You lose Olu Fashanu at left tackle. You lose Caden Wallace, who had his best season in Penn State uniform last year. Both those guys off to the NFL, so you have to replace those. Would be surprised if it's not Drew Shelton at left tackle. He's out for spring camp, but I think they've seen enough from him. Starting 5 games as a true freshman in 2022, playing in every game last year as a swing tackle. I think they like what Drew Shelton brings to the table, and he should be the left tackle. Now at right tackle, we talked about the candidates there, previewing spring ball and everything, right? You're looking at Nolan Rucci, the Wisconsin transfer. You're looking at Anthony Donko, who played extensively in the Peach Bowl, and I thought played pretty well, and I know you agree.
Yep.
Javen Williams,
Yep.
Another guy from the 2023 recruiting class who was a 5-star. But look, sometimes transfers don't work out. Sometimes younger guys aren't ready for the moment, even when they're redshirt freshmen or sophomores. And I think it's valuable to get JB Nelson these reps right now because on the inside, you've got Sal Wormley pretty much like entrenched at right guard. I mean, he decided to come back. He's played there seemingly forever. And then at left guard, you could have, if you had JB at tackle, you could have Bengayon inside. And I'm sure, Phil Troutwine wouldn't bat an eye if that was your starting offensive lineman. If that was your starting 5, if you had Shelton, Ione, Nick Dawkins at center, Wormley at right guard, and if it was JB Nelson at right tackle, like I think Phil Troutwine would run that out if he had to, or if he felt like that was obviously the best grouping. So we'll see. But I like that JB's working at tackle right now. Mine as well, right?
Yeah, and to put him at left tackle, you got to think if the guy's got the physicality and the athleticism that James talked about to play left tackle, he can play right tackle too, because you typically the best pass rusher, it's not always the case, but the left tackle spot is probably even a little bit more important than the right tackle spot. So yeah, he's a guy I think if he stays healthy, I think that Andy and James and Phil will lean on him to start somewhere, number one. But if there's any kind of injury, I think what he can do really there's a comfort level with him, and maybe he's kind of like a security blanket because they do know they can move him and they have other options. Inside. Johnny, let's hear on the blue-white breakdown. There's a couple things I want to get to with you at the very end. We're not getting off this podcast until you give me some NCAA tournament knowledge, specific knowledge. Obviously, the Final Four, but I'm going to probably ask you: is there a game? Is there a game the first 2 days? I don't care when this runs; it's for me. Is there a game the first 2 days, whether it's at 11 o'clock at night on Friday or it's 3 o'clock? This is Thursday, 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon. At least I'll know. The people might not know. Is there a game you love? But as far as pro day, to see that many Penn State kids up there work out after all 10 were invited to the combine, then we get to see Keaton Ellis, Trey Potts, Alex Felkins. But I guess two things jumped out to me is as everyone talks about Penn State's tight ends, and they should. And they've played well at Penn State during James Franklin's time, and they played at a high level in the NFL. But I always knew Theo Johnson was a really good athlete. You could see it. But if you look at what he's done this offseason, like I'm pretty comfortable saying this. There's never been a better athlete at the tight end position, especially when it comes to maybe the pass catching end of it, than Theo. I mean, now I know there is field speed and I know there is testing speed, but he's just destroyed every workout, whether it's the combine, whether it was pro day, whether it was the Senior Bowl. He's just destroyed everything in its path. He's going to be a high draft pick, but it's not only him, Johnny, but to watch Chop Robinson move up at the pro day and at the combine. I mean, those in the history of Penn State football, I mean, there have been better players. There have been. But athletically, those guys, to see them up close, how they move, it's really just amazing to see where football has gone and how athletic the sport has become. And I know you talked to Chop, but I wanted to get your reaction to maybe just what you saw, but also what Chop had to say, not only about what he can do at the NFL, but what he thinks of the defensive end room in 2024.
Yeah, Bob. No, it was interesting talking to Chop. You mentioned the way he moves and the way he moved to pro day. He didn't have to run the 40-yard dash at pro day. He did not run the 40-yard dash.
Never has to run one again, Johnny. Never.
No, that what he did out in Indy, I think it was a 4.48, right? Yeah, I think he's good on 40-yard dashes. the rest of his life. So yeah, Chop Robinson believes that he's a first round pick. He said he's got the best get off in the draft, in terms of the explosive first step, the best bend. And when you flip on the tape and when he's at his best, it's hard to argue with that. There's going to be some teams that, maybe he just doesn't fit for what they want to do. And so, that's why he's not in the top 15 conversation. But I would expect Chop to go in the first round. I think it's like too hard to, deny the athletic ability that he has and what he provides as a pass rusher. And Theo Johnson, I mean, he's going to be a second round guy now, right? That's where it's pointing to, because you've got Brock Bowers, who could be a top 10 pick, the tight end from Georgia. Yeah. And then, I mean, you look at Jatavian Sanders from Texas, but I mean, Theo Johnson has just destroyed the pre-draft process from the, the All-Star game to, the Senior Bowl to what he did in Indianapolis and what he showed just in pass catching and everything at Pro Day. I mean, he has had a phenomenal pre-draft process, and I love what he's been doing so far. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a great group, and you have to give credit to, first and foremost, the players themselves, because, they come in, in Chop's case, he transfers in from Maryland. He was a 5-star guy out of high school, but, Theo comes in, like all these guys, Olu Fashion, who comes in as a 4-star. But again, it's on them to put in the work over the years at Penn State to get to this point. And so for all of them, these last 3 months have been a culmination of years of work, through high school and college. So you want to give them their flowers, give them credit for what they've done to this point. You got to also give credit to Penn State strength and conditioning staff. Chuck Pelosi and his guys have continued what Dwight Galt and his guys did, in the earlier years, under James Franklin. And so I just think this staff, these players, the way they recruit, it's just really indicative of what kind of program Penn State's running right now, that they have won this many guys in the NFL, but also guys who are really lighting up the pre-draft process. I'm excited for Theo and Chop and all those guys to see where they ultimately end up when the draft starts on April 25th, Bob.
Yeah, Johnny. And just to follow up, Chop's got no issues with Abdul Carter moving to defensive end and what he kind of sees from Deny as well. There's some veteran defensive ends in that room. There's a young defensive end, Jameel Lyons, who he was mentioned. I think it was Sal Wormley mentioned him when asked about who's kind of stood out. I mean, there's a lot of buzz, obviously, about him, but the defensive end room as a whole, right? They're going to replace very likely a first-round pick, and I think if Theo's going in the second round, I'm pretty sure Adis is going to go in the second round too. You're replacing two freaks, and they're like, yeah, they're going to be really good again in the fall. So I think that says a lot about what you just touched on, whether it's the strength and conditioning, James's recruiting, their commitment, but just like they do at tight end now in defensive end and corner, the players will be missed, but the players in the system ready to replace them are as good, or some of them could be better. And that's just it's kind of cool to watch a player go from reserve to elite player in a very short time here at Penn State, but it's going to happen a lot moving forward.
Yeah, one quick note, because I know you tossed in the, you're talking to Chop, what did he say about the DNs? And I didn't touch on that in my little ramble there. Got lost in the sauce a bit, I guess. But no, so what Chop said about Abdul, he said that once he kind of gets everything down in terms of like the technique and, kind of the smaller things, the little details as players and coaches like to reference, that he will be quote unquote unstoppable. And like I can see it. Like I can see it. And so you pair Abdul with Denida and Sutton, who all those guys who are talking to Adisa and Chop and even Curtis Jacobs talking about some of these guys, like they all expect big things from Abdul and Denida and Sutton and Jameel Lyons and Zariah Fisher and this group of DNs that Deion Barnes has to work with for the 2024 season. So it's difficult, losing a Chop and an Adisa at the same time. Like I feel like people almost sleep on the production that Adisa had
Right.
in his time at Penn State. I mean, I think it was 27 tackles for loss in 26 games over the last 2 seasons. Like, he was always around the ball. Like, he really made himself some money last season, and also in the pre-draft process, another guy who was really done well for himself, especially coming off that injury that he missed the 2021 season. So yeah, I just think it's difficult for any team to replace two guys like that. But Penn State is in as good of a situation and position as possible to do that, and really intrigued to see what we see from Abdul at defensive end as spring camp rolls around, as all the training camp rolls around, and then eventually the season. Bob, Morgantown, West Virginia cannot come soon enough.
All right, it's the Blue White Breakdown talking about Penn State football, but it's also, as we record this, one of the great weekends, one of the great sporting weekends. I think most people would agree. Top 3 sporting weekend starting on Thursday through Sunday. I mean, it's the NCAA tournament's going to go on for a couple of weeks, but there are a lot of games starting. We're recording this early Thursday morning. This is going to be a little bit dated, but I'm just super excited for this. Johnny, is there anything advice you can give me in the first set of the 32 games or whatever, however many there's going to be played Thursday and Friday? Is there anyone you have your eye on, kind of licking your chops? And big picture, is it going to be chalky, or is there going to be a surprise at the end of the line?
Yeah, so look, I'll start with like the Final Four picks, because
Go ahead.
This is something that any of my buddies know. Anyone who knows, anyone who's played fantasy football with me knows that I am like the tinkerer of all tinkerers when it comes to lineups, brackets.
Sure.
If any listeners have ever seen The League, and Rodney Ruxin, how much he tinkers, like that is me when it comes to my fantasy lineups, and certainly when it comes to my March Madness bracket. So when the bracket came out Sunday night, I filled out like an initial just gut bracket. And then over the next like 2.5 days, I listened to like just the entire drive up to State College, Bob, and back was just March Madness podcasts, like, advanced stats, all that crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was changing my bracket, changing the champion. I have like reverted back to my gut bracket.
You should. I think you should.
So, it could be wrong. It probably will be. Everyone's bracket's always wrong. But so my Final Four is I've got UConn beating Arizona, and then I've got Kentucky beating Creighton, and then UConn beating Kentucky in the championship game. Kentucky honestly could flame out in the second round, and it wouldn't surprise me.
Sure.
But their talent, what they have at guard, is just like Reed Shepherd, Mitchell, like all those guys are just, I think, too good to be denied at least a spot in the Elite Eight. And that's actually what I've got a future on, Bob, if you're looking for some value. I like Kentucky to reach the Elite Eight. In terms of the first round, what I'm looking at, I like BYU. I think they're minus 9.5 against Duquesne. And the story of Duquesne is great. Like Keith Dambrot, their head coach, is retiring. They get in by winning the A-10 tournament. And obviously from Pittsburgh, I spent some time actually covering Duquesne a little bit when I was at the Post-Gazette. Really cool arena. If anyone is like in town in Pittsburgh in like February and you need something to do on a Tuesday night and you want to watch some college hoops, Duquesne is a nice little arena there. I like it. But I don't like them against BYU. I think BYU, they would have been a 5 seed if religiously they could play on Sundays. And so they were moved to a 6 seed. Yeah. And I like BYU to go all the way to the Elite Eight. And so I really like them first round against Duquesne. A couple of other shouts: the over in the Charleston, Alabama game. Neither team plays defense at all. Neither team cares.
I have that one circled too. Yep.
Yeah. So those are some shouts. What about you?
Well, just real quick.
Yeah.
Just to show you that I don't forget when it comes to some things. Pittsburgh hosting some games this weekend. You lived in Pittsburgh. It was Mario's, correct? Mario's was the place that was that one of your places to post up or no?
Yes, yeah. It's not really like.
So which one is it again?
I went to the one in Shady Side because it was like a block away from me. It's not like divey though. I know you love dive bars. They're not really divey. They're just like, I mean, it's wood, like kind of wood paneling and everything. It's a good spot. It's a good sports bar.
All right. I'm terrible at this. Also, I think for the list, they're going to be mad because I think that BYU Duquesne game is like at Thursday at like 2:00, I think. But your point though is valid about BYU going a long way in this tournament. That's what I want our listeners and viewers to focus on when you give out this advice. Not necessarily the first game, but a talented team that is in a bracket that can go a long way. Johnny, I'm usually pretty terrible at this. I'm going to go this far though. I don't know if there's going to be a 1 seed that makes it to the Final Four. How about that?
Okay.
And I just have a feeling of a little bit of a feeling about Baylor. I think that they're in a region that they can win. North Carolina and Arizona are supremely talented, but those guys in the tournament, they give me a little pause. I know it's not going to be easy. I like Baylor a little. The team that I'm curious the most about, and I've seen this happen before in tournaments, is, Marquette has had to shadow UConn all season, kind of be under their thumb. I think they played twice. UConn blew them out of the gym in the game, I think, at UConn. It was a little bit closer when they played at Marquette. I think Marquette's healthy again, and I think they're on the opposite side of the bracket, I think, as UConn. And that is a team, I think, love the coach, Shaka, right? It is Shaka Tony, I think. But anyway.
Shaka Smart. Shaka Tony is...
Oh, that's right. Shaka Tony. Shaka Smart, sorry. Thank God you're on this podcast with me. Apologies. Shaka Smart. Shaka Smart, if you're listening to this podcast, you shouldn't be. But if you are, I was thinking of you the whole time. Shaka Tony, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you're a bit of a gambler. Am I right, Johnny? But good luck to you in the tournament.
I wasn't going to say it.
It's out there. It's public knowledge.
I know.
It's out there, Johnny. It's fair game. Anyway, Shaka Smart, I think, has a history of coaching pretty well in the tournament. I could see them making a very deep run, getting away from UConn. I think that's a talented team. And, I think they can pretty much play with just about anyone else in the tournament. And they've played UConn tough before. I'm anti 1 seeds. I'm tired of the chalk. So maybe that from my perspective, I am flawed. But I'm rooting for a lot of good games, and I think the Final Four could still be great if none of the ones that make through. Because I think the top 12 teams in this tournament are fairly close. But yes, UConn will be tough. But that's my take. So.
No, that's fair. But I mean, look, like Auburn, I believe, is number 4 in KenPom.
Auburn.
Yeah, Auburn's 4th in KenPom, and they're a 4 seed. And that matchup with UConn potentially in the Sweet 16, I've wrestled with it. Among my many tinkering, I've had like Auburn finals. Like it's been weighing heavy. But one more thing, because I know I gave out like the BYU pick, and people may be listening to it after the fact. And so one thing just to look ahead to, and I know that the Charleston, Alabama game, that will be Friday night. One more, though. I like the winner of Michigan State, Mississippi State to beat UNC in the second round.
Ooh.
I do. And it was like that was a part of the gut bracket that stayed throughout the entire time. It's something I feel really good about. UNC, they didn't make the tournament last year, obviously made the national title the year before and lost. But, I just think – I don't think going through Baycott is sustainable. And if, RJ Davis is obviously very talented, but can be streaky. So I like the talent. I like the demeanor and the kind of just hard-nosed attitude that Mississippi State brings, especially to the glass. And then Michigan State, you can't – it sounds like such a cliche, but you can't count out Tom Izzo in March. And, that was the one team that, along with Virginia – were the teams that people were like, why are they in the tournament? Yeah. Like Michigan State has 14 losses. But I think their guard play, Walker and Hogarth, like those guys, they can string together a couple of really good games and potentially knock off North Carolina in the second round.
Feels like a money line bet by you to me for sure, because you're going to get a good price. So good luck you and your handicapping in all facets. I will try to do the same. To all our listeners and viewers, good luck watching the tournament. If you're going to play, I know if you're not going to bet, I'm sure you're going to be in brackets. So I hope your brackets kind of hold up. And good luck also to Shaka Smart and Shaka Tony this tournament as well. Johnny, it's been great chatting with you. There'll be another availability, I think, next Tuesday. Hopefully we'll learn some more. Maybe get to talk to Tom Allen, see what he thinks about this defense. So productive podcast on a Thursday morning. Enjoy the weekend, everyone, and especially you, Johnny McGonigal.
You too, Bob.